I forgot to close the curtain. Excuse me, folks. I'll close the curtain. There we Can't make this stuff up. Okay. Waiting on things to get in sync. pjnet.tv, 9 p.m. or so, 9:01 now, on the East Coast. And our bumper is finally running. That's called The Curtain. And we're recording and streaming to YouTube and Twitter and all those places, Facebook. And Stephanie is standing by in our green room, and our producer will be here shortly, and I'm having to produce this myself. So let's start a countdown to Studio 19 starting now. Well, good evening and welcome to pjnet.tv. Sorry for the kind of false start there. For those of you in the chat room at pjnet.tv, and if you're not there, that's where you should be. You might be watching this somewhere else, but the chat room is the actually best place to watch this program. But you may notice, conspicuous by her absence, Barbara called in, and she's at church, and church is running a bit late, and so I'm having to produce everything here myself. She'll be along a little bit later. I also got a call a moment ago from Michelle Medlock Adams, who is actually on vacation and won't be joining us at 9:30 tonight. So that should catch us up on all the news. And I'm Coach Prasic, and I'm your host, and I love doing this. Tonight, well, once a month, Stephanie Pavlantos comes to visit us, basically the first Wednesday of every month, and that would be now. And she joins us from her home in, I think it's in Ohio. And Stephanie, before we tell your story tonight, I thought your little waterfall hiking adventures were over, but no, just so you're out walking around in the beautiful Ohio outdoors, and there's this beautiful waterfall, and some artist had decided to enhance the waterfall.
Yeah, the rocks. It wasn't much of an enhancement. The colors were extraordinary today, and I've got it up, but you can't see it. But I was doing a little editing on my own pictures, and what didn't show up in my lens was the graffiti. And but then when I put them on my screen and start looking at them, and it's like, oh, look at that! Somebody named Trish just wrote a name across, very large, across the rock in front of the waterfall. So it doesn't make me very happy.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's people should be more considerate, and I'm trying to kind of get all the volumes up for everybody. Something that I did not know, Stephanie, because you are so mature, so well composed, and so joyful. I did not know until recently that you are parenting a special needs child, and in fact, there's kind of it sort of runs in the family. From what I gathered, I listened to your podcast. Now, who was that? You were on a podcast.
Her name's Heather. It's Connecting in the Chaos is the name of her podcast, but it's first time I met her, and she was just wonderful, and even when I got a little emotional, she was very, very sympathetic, very kind, to just like, no, just keep going. And so I did.
Well,
but yeah.
And it doesn't really do any justice to edit those kind of things out, even if you can. But we are live here at pjnet.tv. Mm-hmm. But I did not know your story, and I don't know where you want to begin. But I just there's really two groups of people: those who also have special needs in their family and those of us
Mm-hmm.
that don't. And
Mm-hmm.
I think your message is applicable and relevant to both groups.
Yes. Yes. Because most of the time, even if we don't have a special needs child in our own home, we know somebody who does. And special needs is a broad term. It goes from being on an autistic spectrum, to learning disabilities, to physical disabilities, and even you know, birth defects. So it's pretty broad. In our case, Matthew is a twin, and we had waited for 4 years before we got pregnant, and then they decided to show up early, and as a result, through different complications, because they were 13 weeks early, Matthew had some um, brain damage that we weren't aware of until he started developing. When they're infants, when they're
No,
so
right.
tiny,
Mm-hmm.
you don't
Yeah.
you don't know everything that's going on. We
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we did notice very early on is that he wasn't smiling.
Mm.
You know, when you're a parent, you always watch for that first smile, and Alexandria was always smiling, and Matthew wasn't. And my husband would say, he just seems so unhappy. I wonder why he just won't smile. Well, little did we know that was one of the very first symptoms the first thing you see in a
Hmm.
child with cerebral palsy, because cerebral palsy is a part of the brain that has been damaged, that controls the muscles,
Mm-hmm.
and the muscles become stiff and not easily used. Well, the first muscles that a baby uses is their mouth, their
I
smile.
see. I see.
And so since they can't control, their arms and their legs, they can control their face.
Mm-hmm.
And but a baby with CP cannot. And so smiling actually, you know, there's that saying, I think it takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile, but smiling requires muscles used in a different direction, and that was hard for him. So that's where it began. We started noticing little things like that. And then by the time he was 20 months, his sister, now they were slow in developing, so it wasn't unusual for things to take longer. But Alexandria was walking at 18 months, but Matthew wouldn't walk. He did not even want to walk. And even more so, he wasn't even crawling. He was doing the whole commando thing where it's one hand over the other, pulling. His upper body pulled
Okay.
his lower
Mm-hmm.
body. And so, after prayer, after thinking and praying about it and talking about it, we decided to ask our pediatrician. It's like, he isn't developing. He just doesn't seem to be wanting
Mm.
to walk. And more than that, he was frightened. He would cry. So we took him to an orthopedic surgeon, who was also a pediatric one. And we were so impressed with him because, he's this big guy. I mean, literally, he's probably 6'5" or 6'6", and big, tall man, but just a soft, gentle voice. I remember so clearly. And he just said, I know what's wrong with your son. He goes, he has what we call cerebral palsy. He's very stiff. His legs, he did a variety of movements on Matthew, and Matthew couldn't, his muscles didn't give. His body just didn't move in certain directions. And he did x-rays. And so basically, I lost. Okay. He said that he has cerebral palsy. He goes, now, the good news is Matthew's not going to get worse. This is not a degenerative
Oh.
disease that keeps going in one direction. Actually, I have seen many kids um, do many things with the right therapy and surgeries and whatnot. Um, But, you don't know what you don't know. And we didn't know how many surgeries Matthew was going to have. We didn't know how much therapy Matthew was going to have. We didn't know all the ups and downs. So, so we just took it one day at a time. And we were happy that, the doctors put us in touch with the right therapists, and the therapists were sweet and kind and loved these children. And so we had a lot of good people on our side. Um, so it was just that's kind of where it began. It began that day in the doctor's office at 20 months old,
Mm, okay.
getting his diagnosis and having no idea what that meant. Really, no idea what that was going to entail.
Well, I guess it you find out in the most rude of ways as time
Hmm.
goes on. Uh, that was not good news, but
No,
at least there was good news in the bad news.
right.
So, I've spoken to other parents, and they've lived with this, lived through this and with this. And they said, when you have a special needs child, there's going to be some embarrassing moments. It's
Hmm.
just inevitable. So, where were you spiritually 20 months into you've got twins? And how did that impact
Mm.
your faith, your relationship with God? I can imagine being angry. I can
Hmm.
imagine run.
Hmm.
You can run toward God in those types of situations, or you can be angry or bitter.
Hmm.
Uh, what was your reaction?
It's a really good question because I have to back up to the time that they were born. So when the twins were born, they were not breathing on their own. They couldn't even cry. It actually takes oxygen to cry and to make any sound, obviously. But all you saw were their faces trying to cry, but
Hmm.
nothing came out.
Hmm.
And
Both of them.
both of them.
Yeah.
And so they rushed them to, um, basically so they could put oxygen
Hmm.
in them, and this led to being intubated um, for 30 days. So I couldn't hold them at first. I couldn't hold them because they were so premature that they needed different things. One of which was an arterial line, and it's actually through the aorta. So if that were to be dislodged in picking him up and putting him down, that would have
Hmm.
been fatal.
Right.
So couldn't hold him for the longest time, and and they had their ups and downs, and as I actually talked about this in the podcast because they called them baby A and baby B. Baby A is born first, which Matthew was. Baby B is born second, which Alexandria was. Baby B does not do as well as baby A. So Alexandria had near death experiences, as I call them. She was a little fighter. She'd get her tiny little hand around that tube that was in her throat,
Hmm.
and she'd yank, and
Right.
she'd just pull it out. Um, and as a result, actually, she had to have some surgery to correct the damage that was done there. And but she had so many troubles, problems, and issues that we thought that she would be the one that had all the long-term issues. But there was this one particular time that I was standing, and in there I was standing in by the baby's isolates, and the Matthew, I noticed that his stats were dropping, and I said something to the nurse that his pulse ox has dropped, and she tried to assure me that it was okay, but then she realized it wasn't okay, and she starts bagging him.
Hmm.
Well, nothing's happening. I'm watching the monitor and nothing's happening. And she's calling for the doctor. And I am like, Lord, that doctor needs to come over to my baby right now. My baby is having trouble. And I remember this clearly. The doctor was talking about his Vegas trip and the gambling he had won, the money he had won in his gambling. And I am just like ready to strangle him. I am seriously like, really? My baby's struggling to breathe, and this is what we're talking about. And of course, this was every day for them. This was just a day, you know. And but this was my baby, and I remember just crying out to the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm going to go over there and grab that man by the throat if he doesn't get over here to my baby. And it was like the Lord just put his hands on my shoulders, and I felt peace. And and the words that came to me were, he's going home with you. And I said, okay. And in all this chaos, because then finally the nurse gets the doctor to come over, and now they start moving very quickly because something is wrong. I'm at total peace, and I'm able to sit there and watch, knowing that this isn't the end, that the Lord's not done. And there were many accounts like that, and I just saw the Lord working, and he had a purpose for their lives, and he wasn't going to let it end there. And so that began things for me. You know, that began, God was very, very real. He was speaking to me. He was assuring me. He was giving me peace. So, you know, fast forward 2 years, and I start taking Matthew to physical and occupational therapy. And like I said, great people. Um, they even had a therapy dog. Matthew was she was a chocolate lab named Mallory, after the chocolate shop that's up here at this area. But um, but Matthew loved her, and Matthew loved his therapist, and everyone was just so kind. And then, you know, the Lord used it in ways for me to witness to others. And as moms would be sitting with our other children and talking and all that, you know, I would just be able to share Jesus with them, and why I can get through what I'm going through, you know, and why they can get through what they're going through. And just being able to be friends with them, but also seeing what the Lord was doing in Matthew, and watching how Matthew was getting stronger, and he was such a happy, happy boy. He still is. Um, you know, like, not to compare, but Miley Cyrus, I guess they used to call the way she got her nickname was because she was always smiling. And I would joke with him because they liked some of those shows that she was on when they were younger. And I said, yeah, we should start calling you Miley because you smiley all the time. And but he was just a happy boy. He had a sweet, gentle spirit within him. And we knew God was using him. We knew God was very real to him. And so even though it was hard, and there were lots of hard days, it was hard, you know, when they want to put needles in your son's legs and they're saying, Mom, you need to hold him down. And I'm like, what? I can't hold my son down. And, but yet, you know, you have to do what you have to do because he wanted me there too. Matthew was like, don't leave me. And so you had to push through. And I had to rely on God to get me through those things, to get me through the surgery and my little boy crying out in pain. You know, they were hard. And, you know, at one point he had to have nurses come in and do pain management with him because he was hurting. And
So I just didn't leave his side, you know? I just stayed there.
Hmm.
Mom, my mom, and sometimes my sisters would come and take care of the other children so I could just spend the night at the hospital. And, um, it was hard because there were other people who didn't understand that life that we had. And, no one wants to hear someone cry all the time. But there were just days that were harder. And sometimes, as moms who have special needs children, you need somebody who could deal with those tears, who can deal with the overwhelming sense of hopelessness in the sense that you can't do anything for your child. I couldn't take away his pain. I couldn't make, you know, I couldn't make him walk. I couldn't do this or that. I couldn't make him see. Matthew also has vision issues. And then about 10, he started having seizures. Um, and then that was hard because people started shying away. That scared people when, for a child to have a seizure and I need a tissue.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll visit the chat room when we're done, but
Yeah.
in the chat room, Ben Cooper says, "Ever wish you could just hug the guest?"
I know. He's a sweet guy. So, um, but God was with us, and the people don't realize either. I mean, it was hard on your marriage. It was hard on family. It was hard. It was hard for my mom, who my brother had cerebral palsy as well. So it was hard for her because she had to live through it again. My brother died when I was born. So he was 10 years older than me, and he died um, from pneumonia. And he was actually much worse than Matthew ever was. Um, so, it was hard on her. And there were times that, looking back, I know she was just avoiding me in a way. Not Matthew, but just not wanting to see, I think, relive the pain.
Right.
And so it was hard on people.
Stephanie, how old are your twins now?
25.
And how are things now?
They're good. Um, Matthew is very, very bright. A lot of people think that when you have some kind of disability that it affects you mentally and cognitively, and it didn't. Matthew speaks fluent Arabic. Um,
Well, that's a nice compliment to your Hebrew.
yeah,
Come on.
yeah. So we're a family of liking languages, I guess. But he always had, even though he had a lot of vision issues, he had very, very good ears. Very, very good hearing, I should say, but understanding through what he
Oh,
heard.
okay. Comprehension.
So I remember once they watched Veggie Tales all the time. It was a
Uh,
good show that we could
right.
let them watch all the time. And I remember him coming to the lunch table, and I called them for lunch. And I think he was probably 4, maybe 5, but he goes, "I'm famished." And I said, "You have eaten today. How can you be famished?" And then I said, "Do you know what that means?" And he goes, "No, but it was used when someone was hungry." And I said, "Well, you used it correctly." And after that, it was just like vocabulary city for us because, what he heard and what he understood and he could repeat. And we had a Russian piano teacher, and, it was like to him, she didn't even speak with the accent. He understood her perfectly. And she was heavy accented. And
And so we knew, we started understanding that he heard what we didn't, and he understood what he heard. His understanding came from what he heard, not from what he saw, and not from what he did. It was came from what he heard. So, so yeah, so we started just, having testing, and I homeschooled, and because we were actually all set to put our kids in a private school down the road, and then we were told that he needed surgery on both legs, and they would be in casts for, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I was in that situation.
Yeah, so he had to have his heel cords done, which is basically between the between the bottom of the foot and the calf. So it's that little part that runs behind your ankle. A tendon was way too tight, and it wasn't allowing him to bend his foot properly.
Mm-hmm.
And he had already had surgery on his quadriceps, and so this was just another surgery he needed. And so we had to pull him out of school because we just knew that he was never going to be able to get around. And this school was old, and they didn't have elevators.
Right.
And oh yes, they did, but it was still, that's what it was. But they had no one. I would have had to be there all the time. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we just started homeschooling, and he thrived in that environment because I catered things to him. Now, this is a child who hated to color, who hated different things because of his vision and because of his fine motor controls. He didn't like to try and write. He didn't like to color. He didn't like to do these things. So we read. I read all the time to him. And so, but he could hear, he could listen very well and understand. He was a very auditory, I guess is the best way to put it. He was a very auditory child. So that worked. We found a mode of education that we could do that helped him learn and speak well, if that makes sense. So,
Stephanie, for those of us, we've all had encounters. If we don't have a special needs child of our own, we certainly have had interaction and encounters. And you've been very candid. I'll be very candid. It's very uncomfortable because the sort of social norms and mores that kind of govern our interaction don't apply,
right.
or they don't work. And I think that you have the maturity to help others of us go through and tell me some of the things that when people responded or interacted that was truly helpful, assisting, comforting, and then also share with us some of the things that people would say or do with good intentions, of course, that actually were not helpful and in fact hurtful, because we all get placed. We don't get to decide when these situations impact our lives. You lived with it, okay, and you adjusted. We, on the other hand, are caught off guard. So help us minister to others appropriately, and share with us how we can, or from your own experience, how we can be more help to parents who are working with children with whatever the infirmity may be, special needs.
Oh boy.
Worst case, worst thing that ever happened. Let's end on a high note.
Okay. So, well, it was funny because I had a family member, when they were first born, she said, you brat, you just had to have your babies before me. And I'm thinking to myself, what? This is not a contest. My babies, I would much have rather that they were inside of me.
They're struggling to breathe. They're fighting for their lives. She didn't understand that. When she saw them, my mom told me that she felt so badly because she had no idea the condition they were in.
Right.
So saying flippant things, even if you mean it as a joke, is going to sting to somebody who has a child that can't do, or isn't the norm. Only way to put it, you know. People will sometimes say, "Oh yeah, I had a premature baby too," and I'm like, "Oh really? What happened?" And they said, "Yeah, she came 2 weeks early," and I'm like, "Oh, that's not premature," you know. It's like, okay, that's fine, but but I, ask questions because I never had a problem talking about Matthew and what he could and couldn't do. I never had a problem. It never upset me to talk about my son, you know, even to describe the hard things. It never upset me just to do that, I mean, I get teary eyed now, but then it was life. It was just day to day life. And if I could explain it to somebody and help them deal with Matthew better, then I was all for that. Um, but people get to know the child. Um, don't make assumptions because that can be hurtful. You just like, when people would assume that Matthew was mentally not there, um, that was hurtful. He can't use his legs, so you assume that his brain is damaged permanently or that his cognitive skills are lacking. Don't make assumptions. Matthew was a shy little boy, and so he didn't talk to a lot of other children. Um, and to make an assumption because he won't talk to a child, that didn't mean that he couldn't. You know, um, I think that you know some things you just have to keep to yourself, but I think that there are other things that you can be honest about, and I think that's the best thing. I had a friend, her son was Matthew's best friend, and he was a very athletic, very what we call normally developing child, strong and athletic and very popular child, but he was a very, very sweet and tender-hearted boy, and he looked out for Matthew. But his mother had decided when Matthew started having seizures that was going to be too hard for her to deal with. So she said, I don't know if I can have Matthew at my house. And while I appreciated her honesty and her fear, it didn't mean it didn't hurt. And and I was able. I told the story on the podcast that I basically went to my husband and said, I'm so upset, but I don't want you to defend this person. I don't want you to take her side in any way. I want you to just listen to me and let all of that logic just go to the side for a minute and just listen to my emotions because this is where I'm at. And he did. And I ranted and I raved and I cried and I yelled. And then he goes, okay, are you ready to hear common sense? And I'm like, okay. And he goes, you can understand her fear, right? And I said, yes. I don't like it. This is my little boy, and he deserves friends.
I
So,
did. I did hear you share that on the podcast, and the question that came to my mind then, and the question that comes to my mind now is, well, what could she have done that would have been? How can we better
mhm.
minister
I
to
think
those?
if that's a good question because I think if she had just come and said, it kind of scares me. I don't know what I would do if Matthew had a seizure at my house. So how can we make this work? Instead of just saying, I can't have him at my house anymore, how can we make this work? Can you stay when he's there? We can sit at the kitchen, we can talk. Um, what will make it happen so that your son gets to be with his friend and I am not terrified that he's going to have a seizure and I'm not going to know what to do. So I think sometimes it's just thinking it through before you share your fear, because I think that you need to understand that the special needs mom, no matter what the needs are, there are fears that she's carrying around of her own. And those fears are going to trump yours. They're going to trump yours every time. And so, there's just ways of putting things. And I'm not saying her fear wasn't real and wasn't valid, because it most certainly was. And we talked about it later. I had to get it off my chest. And in doing that, I was able to have a very calm, rational conversation with her about how that had hurt me. But yet, and she was very apologetic, but yet then we were able to talk more about just like, I will stay there, just same things I've already said. Or let your son come here more often, and that way I'm here. You're not having to deal with it. So there are ways around things, there are ways to help.
How about this one, Stephanie? I'm praying for you. Let me know if there's anything you need.
Yeah. More than likely, I said I'm fine. I just said I'm fine. I never is too strong. I rarely ever told people what I needed. I knew they were being nice. I wasn't sure that they really meant it.
I'm not sure either. When I say those things, sometimes I'm just saying the church, speak type stuff.
Politically correct.
Politically correct, whatever.
Yeah.
What?
I'll have a story that will illustrate something, I think, for you.
Help me. Yeah.
Matthew, we went to a church event at Easter time, and they were having, it was at someone's home, and their backyard was very huge. And they had all the I don't know, it's something like 3 to 5 year olds, okay? They had this part of the yard where their eggs were hidden, okay? So they lined them all up, and so Matthew is in a walker. So they line them all up and they say, okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Every child ran as fast as they could. And here's Matthew with his little walker, trying his best to catch up with them. And he's extremely excited. He can't even contain himself. He's just his little legs, and he's trying to move that walker in uneven ground, uneven terrain and grassy. And this man from our church, who was a Marine, I remember that very clearly, but he runs up to Matthew. He grabs Matthew with one arm. He grabs his walker with the other, and he runs with him. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to hurry Matthew. I'm trying to help him go faster. This man just picked him up and ran with him. And he put him in front, because Matthew's his vision wasn't very good. So he put him in front of eggs. He helped him get them. He held the basket. He did way more than I could have ever done, ever. My husband was working. He was unable to be there that day. But this man he didn't ask me. He just picked him up and ran. And I'm going to help you get as many eggs as you can. And Matthew was so happy. He was so excited. And the smile. And it was just like, I couldn't thank that man enough. I just couldn't, because what he did was was awesome. It was, you know,
Yeah. A lot of
I
lessons
mean,
in that, Stephanie.
yeah.
Stephanie, thanks for
Another
sharing.
question.
Because
Yeah, sorry. But yeah, you're welcome. Those little
so
things
much.
still make me cry just because
Well, they
there was a lot of
should.
joy.
If they didn't, I think you would need to see a doctor.
Yeah.
The takeaway is this. We went from the lame, I'm praying for you, let me know if you need anything, to seeing a need and
Hmm.
just acting, just meet the need.
Hmm.
Now, I mean, I can imagine so many, sometimes we see that and we hesitate.
Yeah.
And during that hesitation, you know, um, but thank God for that Marine. What a
Yeah.
what a soldier, what a warrior.
Yeah.
I think that speaks well of the Marine Corps, and I admire that. And that's the kind of well, folks, when things happen, we need to just courageously do the right thing. Um,
Hmm.
what are I know that in my own life, people offer counsel, and I assume they mean well,
Hmm.
but sometimes it's so theologically out of bounds.
Yeah.
It's I don't even know if we want to go there, but is is there any partner that came alongside spiritually, even if it was just for an incident? Again, what's an example of
Hmm.
bad advice during this time that you got? What's an example of good advice that was spiritually comforting?
Hmm.
That because it's easy to lose your faith in trying times
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah. I mean, I had one friend that we would go out one Monday a month, a Monday night, and we would just go and be together. And and there were times that and like I said, I mean, she would have us over. She wasn't afraid of Matthew. She wasn't. I think that's one of the biggest things. Get to know that child. Be honest, find out what are their limitations. Is there anything I could say that might upset them? Or how can I be a friend to that child? Most of the special needs children have hearts of gold. I feel we always felt, my husband and I always felt like, when you can get to a place that you wouldn't want your child changed in any way because you wouldn't want their heart to be any different. And you can be happy because they have a sweet, tender spirit that you would never want to see changed. We had a pastor asked us if healing Matthew meant that it changed him spiritually, emotionally. Would you want him physically healed? And we were both able to say no because Matthew was special the way he was. He had a tender heart. He still does. Has a very. My husband's over here and he's like all tearing up. So it doesn't help me. But we just knew we didn't want him any different because, and I've seen that over and over and over with these types of children. They don't pity themselves, they don't feel sorry. They just do what they can do. Matthew, one of the things we wanted to instill in him was that he could do anything and we would support him. And it didn't matter, you know. Um, he was not different. Maybe his body was slightly different, but inside where it counted, he was not different.
Well, Stephanie, I'm glad that we had the extra time to
Hmm.
share tonight. From the sounds of it, you need to go minister to your husband who's falling apart over there. But sincerely, I won't say that I've enjoyed this any more than you would say, but I think this is. I feel good that we've done this, and of course, I thank you and thank you for sharing. I had no idea,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah,
have
it's
helped all
funny
of
because
us.
I don't talk about it that much, and honestly, the Lord is, I have written about it, so people who have read my blog probably know about Matthew's disabilities and his birth and the issues that went along with that, but I don't share
Yeah, you don't wear
that
it on your
long,
shoulder.
but
Yeah.
yeah, thing.
Okay. Well,
So,
Stephanie, we'll see you next month about this time, and
yep,
you made it, and
I did.
and I know that's an answer to prayer. Thank you so
Well,
much.
ugly crying.
There you go. No problem, Stephanie. Stephanie Pavlantos, folks. Wow, I'm kind of left speechless. What could I possibly say to add to what's already been shared? So I'll add this, as I always do. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? And how long ago was that? When we think of bold things, maybe I've got it wrong. Because we think of bold things as things that require great courage, things that you are risking your life, or your reputation, or your fortune. And those would be bold. But tonight I heard a story about a different kind of boldness. When that Marine stepped up and stepped out. That's boldness too, isn't it? So whatever it is, I hope that none of us will ever be satisfied with our answers to either of those two questions.